TTL, or what stands for time to live, is essentially like being able to set a data retention policy or an expiration policy on an artifact. And it effectively allows our enterprise teams and users to better manage retention of artifacts and automatically schedule them for deletion. Now, this becomes particularly important for any customers that we work with that are using weights and biases to track and version their data sets. And they have their own compliance stakeholders. Maybe those are internal or external bodies that want to make sure that they're keeping track of which data sets were used, particularly when data sets might include any kind of PII or personally identifiable information, anything from credit card details, addresses, names, images, all of those fall into the category of PII. The other kind of big use case we see for TTL is better management of storage. So if you kind of want to use these expiration policies to archive older artifacts, that's another option for you as well. Now, the two big features that I'm going to cover today around TTL are going to be centered around the team settings page, which you'll only be familiar with if you're a team admin. So this is the page that I'm sharing right now. It's this team settings that only team admins have access to. And in this first box, you'll see kind of this control plane for being able to set any properties for the TTLs that you want to add for your team. Now, the first option you have as a team admin is to decide who is allowed to set and edit TTL values for artifacts. So is it going to be just team admins who have that kind of control, or do you want to roll it out to be expanded to team admins and members? This becomes particularly important when we go to the next phase of the decision you have to make around setting a default policy that will apply to all artifacts under your team. So I'm going to go ahead and set one of those to 100 days. Actually, let's give it a year. And note that because I expanded the permissions to include members, I'm also giving permissions for members to override these default. Now, if you want this default to kind of override or exist and prevent any members from editing, the better option for you might be to select team admins. Going to go ahead and save that. And one thing to know is you'll see kind of this summary page, which will share any changes that you tried to make. And the big reason for calling this out and adding a bunch of writing in red is because we do consider TTL destructive action, because it eventually will cause the deletion of artifacts. So you want to make sure as an admin, you're reading these very carefully. And once you feel like, you set the right things in place, you can go ahead and save these settings. Cool. Now let's see what this might look like in the actual project. Now, again, because team admins and members can set and edit TTL, the view that I'm going to pull up now in this conveniently located TTL project is going to be a view that all members and admins will be able to see. Now, you'll also see here that I already have a data set set up that contains a bunch of different versions with a few different aliases. So in this case, we're going to be working with a data set that contains clinical data, and is a good example of a data set that might contain PII. This is actually a public data set that we have some customers working with to measure kind of quality of healthcare across the United States. And you can imagine that this might be a good example of a data set that has things like patient information, et cetera, that need to be deleted according to regulations after a certain amount of time. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually walk through, you can see here, because we have this default policy set, there'll already be a TTL remaining. And just to click through and prove that kind of all of the versions will get this. One thing to know is you'll see, hey, I saw you set it for around 365 days. Why is this not a year? Well, one thing to remember is that we calculate TTL based off of when the artifact was created. So since it was created about 12 days ago, then it has essentially 365 minus 12 days remaining until expiration happens. Now I'm going to go to this version here. you'll notice it has this alias that says PII removed. So we're going to consider this some kind of data set that went through processing, and it was de-anonymized and all forms of identification were removed. So this is actually a data set that we can decide we want to leave this for a little bit longer and either revise the TTL policy to make it a little bit longer or just get rid of it together. So what we're going to do is say, hey, I want you to no longer inherit directly from the team's default. Instead, I'm going to go in and say, I actually want a longer one of 1,000 days, potentially. So I can go ahead and update this. And it'll go ahead and, as you can see here, update it to be slightly longer duration. You can see the adjustment to 2.7 years remaining. Cool. And then let's take a look at another version here, just so I can walk through if rather than updating it to be longer, you also just have the option of deactivating the TTL policy completely. So you would also jump to this edit view. Again, instead of inheriting from the team's default, which is 365 days, as we remember setting together in the team settings earlier, we're going to deactivate it completely. We're not going to set a custom one. We're going to say, hey, we're just going to go ahead, exclude it from any automated deletion. Nice. And you can see that that's been updated here, and the TTL remaining has been returned to inactive. Note that I went through this process for data sets. It can be applied to any artifacts as you see fit, depending on the use case your team has. And thank you so much. That's all I wanted to talk today about using TTL and weights and biases for artifacts for enterprise teams to better manage the content that you're using in weights and biases and give you the opportunity to make sure you're staying in compliance or managing your storage.